because the pharaoh that tormented Moses was most certainly a disbeliever. But he was followed by people in his own community that said, follow the messengers when Moses and Aaron came. And in the time of Surah Yusuf, when Yusuf is brought into Egypt, he follows the deen of the Malik that is there at that time. The pharaoh in the time of Yusuf does not have his religion disparaged, because presumably something of the original teaching of the prophet Idris is still alive and present in that place. I see you're not convinced, so let's just go to Surah Taha. وَمَا بَالِ الْقُرُونِ الْأُولَى, Pharaoh asks, saying to Moses, what of the past generations? Who is this Lord of yours? Moses and Aaron. He is the Lord that gives everything its form and guides it. What about the previous generations? In other words, what about the religion of my forefathers? What is the Quran's usual response when a disbelieving, belligerent people ask, what about the religion of my forefathers? The response is almost always the same. Would you follow your forefathers when they were lost in error? Correct? Is that what Moses says to Pharaoh in Surah Taha? After the question, وَمَا بَالَ الْقُرُونِ الْأُولَى, what about the previous generation? That is not what he says. He says, their knowledge is with my Lord in a book. He neither errs nor forgets. Some of the Mufassireen say that this is not simply a reference to the Lawh al-Mahfuz that records all deeds, but actually a reference to that first written book. The first of the prophets to teach by the pen. So if the first of the prophets to teach by the pen taught in ancient Egypt and was ancient Egyptian and was probably blacker than the Ace of Spades, what language was he writing in? Hieroglyphs. And indeed, in single pages of ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, you can find 30 to 40 of the 99 names of God in a single page of some ancient Egyptian pyramid text. The first time in the recorded history of humanity that the term Lord of the Throne is ever used is in ancient Egyptian pyramid text from 3000 BC. When we go back for the lost patrimony of ancient Egypt, whether we are black people or Muslims or both, we are not simply going back for a patrimony that belongs to us as believers, but we are going back for a patrimony that belongs to us as Muslims and as black people. Because the majority of the Quranic text in its tales and its qissas actually take place in ancient Africa and are about ancient Africans. It is not an act of diversity training to include black people in the story. Most of the stories are already about black people, but we have taught this religion in a way that keeps black people out of the story. I've given lectures where Arab and Desi people with the name Luqman came up to me after the talk and said that they didn't know that Luqman was black. Much less Moses. So the first thing to say about Islam and black culture, from Kemet to Crenshaw, is to say that the first accommodation between Islam and black culture was literally in the embodiment of the first human being, Adam. Alayhi salam. Alayhi salam. The first time that there was a written reconciliation between the word of God and black culture was in the book of Idris. But we are in an American environment, a white supremacist environment. We are in Muslim communities that have vehement and fervent anti-blackness in them, which is why many people will have never made it down to this masjid. Which is why, and I'm just going to say this, it's going to sound boastful, but I'm just being accurate, is that if I walk into this masjid whether this masjid is Islah here in LA, or whether it's Imam Sunjata's lighthouse up in Oakland, or it's the Muslim Center in Detroit, or it's, well, basically any spot in Philly. The point is that when I walk into that masjid, people will have heard of these ideas and heard of these talks. Whereas if I walk into those suburban masjid, people don't have any idea who I am. Because they're not interested in black people and they're not learning about black history. They haven't read the Walking Quran. They don't know that there's 1,000 years, 1,200 years of history of learning and teaching the Quran in West Africa, because we behave as though Black Lives Matter and putting a black square in our social media story is an act of charity that we give to black people, make them part of our discussion as a Muslim community. No. And it's not just in the Quranic text that black people are centered. It is in the lifetime of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Would you like to know who else is described with the color terminology? Asmar Shadidul Asmara. You know who Bilal was, obviously.
Umar.
But so was Ali. So was Ali.
Umar too.
So was Sayyidina Umar. Radiallahu ta'ala an. Why? Well, because a couple of things, and we'll stick with Ali and Umar. May Allah be well pleased with both of them.
Ameen.
Because they're excellent description of this. Ali, may Allah be well pleased with him and ennoble his face, Prophet's cousin, close blood relative, described as dark brown, chocolate brown in color, whereas the Prophet ﷺ is described as fairer in skin, more akin to Ibrahim. Let's go back to what we just learned about ancient Egypt. Where did Hagar come from?
Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt.
Okay, wait, so let me okay, I got this. I'm following this way. SubhanAllah. So we got Hagar, peace be upon her, coming from the ancient Nile Valley. In point of fact, not just Egypt, but Upper Egypt or Nubia. Wedded to, and don't let anyone tell you that Hagar is a slave. Don't let anyone tell you that. That is a fiction and a lie that is created by the Jews in order to diminish the status of the children of Ismail and raise those of Israel. Understand that. She is part of a delegation gift, but she's not bonded, she is not owned. There are many statuses that do not encompass slavery, wherein people are entered into relationships in that time, but she is not a slave, she is not a concubine. There is no price that is exchanged for her, she is not a slave. She is not owned by Ibrahim. That is a lie. And she is of royal origin. So, should it surprise us then that the Arabs would range in color even in a single family, from lighter in skin tone, like the Messenger of God, alayhi afdal salatu wasalam, whose hair was neither curly nor lank, or neither jab nor lank, it was curly, it was neither kinky nor lank, is the better way of saying that. And someone like Ali, who was much darker in skin tone? No, because when people are produced through lighter skin and darker skin mixing, as you see in the African American community, you get every range of color. Because every color comes from black. Every color comes from black. When you took all those handfuls of earth from all over the different parts and God molded it with his own two hands, don't ever forget that. He touched the human race and breathed of his own breath into our frame to animate us. He made us with a caress. He animated us with a kiss. That's not something he says about anything else in creation. Human beings are precious. Every last one of us. Black, white, brown, red, yellow, anything in between. So in the lifetime of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many of the characters that you are used to seeing as depicted in stories like The Message. We already savaged Exodus, Gods and Kings. Let's go in on the so-called Muslim filmmakers. When they represent Bilal as the only black person in the story. What about Umar? Umar is of Abyssinian lineage on his maternal side and Arab on his paternal side. You have dark-skinned, full-blooded Arabs like Ali. And you have people that are of Abyssinian origin, and you have people like Umar who are of both. Abyssinian lineage and Arab origin, they also would be what we would today describe as black people.
Mm-hmm.
The Muslims, the black Muslims are hiding in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
We've made them disappear from the story because our version of Islam is as corrupted by Arab ethnic chauvinism as American history is corrupted by white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
It is a lie designed to make us vanish. So that we can be treated with paternalistic condescension. Raise your hand if you have ever had somebody presume you didn't know what you were talking about Islam just because you were black. Habib Rasul just stepped out, but one of our shared teachers, Imam Salim Joseph, may God have mercy on his soul, one of the giants in the Tijani community in the city of Detroit. Great scholar, studied with Sheikh Hassan Cisse for years. Went to Senegal in the 1980s when nobody was doing that. Scholar of Islam. When he would go around the corner and be greeted by the Arab grocers, and because he wasn't pronouncing his salam alaikum with an Arabic accent, but with a Detroit accent, they'd be like, "Oh, you're Muslim, do you know Fatiha?"
Mm.
That's what he said. He said his response was, "Does your mama know Fatiha?"
Mm. You went all the way
Do y'all
savage.
feel me?
Of course.
I have had I studied in West Africa. My teachers and guides are all West African. I'm Maliki by religious right. I pray with my arms and my sides. I have had Arabs hit my arms in prayer to try to get me to fold my arms because they presumed I didn't know how to pray. When I explained to them the precedents in the Maliki school for praying with sadl instead of qab, they don't even know those two words. Much less the relevant hadith about it. And I understand that there are disputes even amongst Malikis, but the ordinary position is that Imam Malik said that he had never seen an obligatory prayer in the Prophet's masjid in Medina prayed with the arms folded across the chest. So while he recognized that there were hadith that said this is a perfectly acceptable and valid way to perform the prayer, he didn't himself pray that way. The point is not to say that you're supposed to pray with your arms at your sides. They're both acceptable forms of prayer. The point is that why do you think that you know better?
Exactly.
Why is your presumption that I don't know what I'm doing?
Exactly.
How come it didn't occur to you that I might know something you don't know?
Exactly.
Because whenever I see something that I don't understand, I presume that I haven't yet been informed about it.
Exactly. Stay quiet.
In the interest of time, we'll move forward. So we've talked about Islam and black people. Now let's talk about Islam and black culture, also in the lifetime of the Prophet alayhi wasallam. I'm gonna make my brother uncomfortable by pointing to the handsome brother in the black and gray boo-boo seated directly in front of me. Chimezi Umesi, also known as Chizabam, one of the dopest MCs y'all haven't heard about yet, okay? But we're here filming a music video, portions of it after this lecture, and y'all are welcome to sign a waiver and get in a crowd shot if y'all want to get into a crowd shot. Please do. But when I talk about the work that I'm doing with him and other Muslim rappers, people always want to cite black music. Some cite music in general, but most really are talking specifically about black music being haram. Okay, this is the conversation that they're gonna have. Now, never mind that they're still listening to whatever her name is, in their car.
Khartoum.
Yeah, thank you. In their car, but they've decided that black music is haram. Okay, and they'll come after you for that. You know, I get a lot of people in my DMs. They're like, "Sheikh, we like your books, this, that, and the other, but why are you talking about hip hop all the time?" And so I just remind them with the following narration that comes from the lifetime of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu. When an African delegation, Beni Arfada, comes and does a performance of drumming and dancing and poetry recitation over the drumming, dancing, and singing, the Prophet stands there smiling, applauds their performance. Aisha doesn't know what to do. She looks over his blessed shoulder, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that she can watch the drumming and the dancing. After it's over, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam turns and says to her, Aisha, did you not enjoy their performance? During the performance in the narrations, he says, Dunukum Bani Arfada. Go on, Bani Arfada. He says in the parlance of the time, go ahead, get it. When he is questioned about this, he says that it is so that the Jews and the Christians will understand that there is latitude in religion. Religion is meant to make room for culture, not eliminate it. That which the human being does is not presumed to be haram, it is presumed to be halal, unless it directly and overtly contradicts something that is brought in the sacred law. But our communities reason from the opposite perspective. They think that if something isn't attested in the practice of the Prophet ﷺ and his communities, then you should presume that you can't do it. It's backwards. The medieval Andalusian jurist, Shatabi, says that juristic incompetence could impose no greater burden on a people than to cause them to give up that which is good in their conventional customs and usages. Juristic incompetence. Well, we got a lot of that now, don't we?
Yeah.
People that are trying to erase and level your culture and make it go away, and acting like they are enacting the sunnah of the greatest of creations, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they impose their cultural imperialism on you. Astaghfirullah al-azim. Imam Malik, whom I mentioned a moment ago, as may Allah be well pleased with him, have mercy on him. And by the way, Imam Shafi is a student of Imam Malik, right? Even though they disagreed on the elements of prayer, they loved one another. You know, because back then people knew how to disagree. They had adab. They had adab. You know, and there's stories that I could tell about that, but in the interest of time, I'll leave those. Imam Malik was once absent from the city of Medina where he was principal legal authority, and he left in charge one of his students. I didn't have time to actually look up the student's name again, but I've heard the story many times from teachers in West Africa. There was a delegation that came in Imam Malik's absence. I want to say they're from the Caucasus region. They're coming from what's now Eastern Europe, and traveled all the way to Medina. They want to learn how to practice Islam better. Mashallah, may Allah reward them for all eternity for making that hike. So they make the hike and they ask for a series of legal opinions but they find that Malik is not there. The student writes the legal opinions and sends them on their way. Malik comes back and asks what happened while I was gone. Not much, but there were some people that came, from far away, and I gave them opinions. So Imam Malik asked, he said, have you been to their land? And the student said, no. He said, do you speak their language? He said, no, I don't speak their language. He said, and what do you know of their customs and conventions? He said, I don't know anything of their customs and conventions. He said, well, then how could you presume to write fatwa for them? How can you presume to tell people what Islam is supposed to look like among them when you don't know them? How are you supposed to tell us what Islam is supposed to look like among us when you ain't never been down here? Can I get an amen? That's not religion. That's not deen. That's not anything. That is cultural imperialism. And any person with a backbone, male or female, should know to resist it. I'm laughing because we're only through point 2 on the bullet points. So I'll start to move faster. So what I've tried to signal is first the importance of black people in the sacred story, then about black culture specifically through the story of Bani Afra, and then about culture more broadly. That our teaching, manifesting, bringing Islam into expression has to be relevant and rooted in the culture. But for that, let's go to Malcolm for a minute, because why do we as black people, as black Muslims, accept this? Why have we given up the cultural high ground that we had in the 60s and 70s when Muslims were punching way above their weight in terms of their social impact in the society? Now our numbers are much, much higher on a percentage basis. Our resources in terms of the millions or even billions of dollars to which we have access in our community vastly outpace that to which we had access in that time. And yet we have no influence in the culture. We are utterly and completely irrelevant. Listen to that, Muslim, let it sink in. Nobody cares about your arguments, about whether you're praying with your arms folded or your arms at the sides. They're trying to cut both arms off. Mm-hmm. While you're having your arguments about fiqh, they're moving right ahead with the project of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And by the way, just because you got to check white in that box doesn't mean they see you that way. Mm. When the orange guy says build a wall and ban the Muslims in the same breath, he's trying to keep out our Mexican American brothers and sisters and our Malaysian and Middle Eastern brothers and sisters with the same word, because to him, y'all are all just some non-white people. So while some of y'all are looking down at us that aren't even that black, I'll be honest, they're looking down at everybody. We all have a white supremacy problem. Mm-hmm. So we have the capacity that we didn't have in previous days, but we have no cultural relevance. We don't make an impact in the culture. And it's because we don't attend to culture, one, and because we also specifically have assaulted and denied, tried to remove black culture from our expression of Islam. Mm-hmm. Take the black out of it. The thing is that we brought Islam here. Whether in vessels from the Empire of Mali in the 14th century to South America, or amongst the enslaved that were brought to New Spain, which later becomes Mexico, to Florida, to what becomes the United States of America, we brought Islam here. Mm-hmm. We established it in this place. And we have given up our cultural relevance as Muslims because we have been shy about embracing black culture. We've run from it. Why have we as black people accepted it? Why have we taken the bullying and tried to perform our Islam so that it seems suitable to cultural models of people who detest us? Malcolm El-Hajj Malik Shabazz said that the problem with the Negro is that if he sees a Negro selling ice and a white man selling ice, he's going to assume that the white man's ice is colder. Mm. And the problem with the black Muslim is that the black Muslim hears a black man talking and an Arab talking, he's going to presume that the Arab's word is colder. Mm-hmm. Would that be the case if we knew our centrality in the story in the first place? Such is the stakes of history. This is why we offer these reminders for the heart, as a way of cultivating meanings and understandings, but also motivation and resolve. This cannot be allowed to persist. I don't want my daughters to grow up feeling that being black and being Muslim are irreconcilable, so they have to choose. Mm-hmm. I don't want my Malaysian or Indonesian brothers and sisters growing up feeling like they have to decide whether they're going to perform what looks like mainstream normativity in this community or live out their culture fully. That's not right. That's not why God made us different, so that we could all be leveled in front of a juggernaut. He made us in different tongues and cultures so that we would know one another, so that our individual cultural geniuses, our individual unique expressiveness as people would inform a kind of human symphony. Beethoven, right? If you had given, and I lived in Senegal for years, started going in 1996, if you had given Senegalese 100 million years and 100 million violins, they were never going to come up with Beethoven. And if you gave Beethoven's people 100 million years and 100 million djembes, they were never going to come up with a Yusu Endure 6-part rhythm breakdown with 6 different drums all talking to each other at the same time. That was never going to happen. But do you know what happens when you take that polyrhythmic percussion from the West African tradition and you pair it with stringed instruments and horns? We called it jazz. And jazz musicians, jazz artists, visual artists were the core of those communities that my brother Habib Rasul studied. Muslims were not just at the forefront of political debate and discussion, cultural symbols like Muhammad Ali, like Malcolm, but were at the forefront of cultural production. The most creative, uncolonized black artists gravitated towards Islam because they saw in the black expression of Islam in that time the best possible way to express their cultural freedom inwardly and outwardly. And then here we came, stifling it all. To the point where now the Muslims that are successful commercially, you have no idea that they're Muslims. And that the artists that simply perform for Muslim crowds can't be commercially viable. One, and I'll just say this as a general rule, because people don't want to hear identity-driven rap. They don't want to hear you rapping about how Muslim you are. Only people that are already Muslim will be interested in that. The expressive art of that era of the 60s and 70s didn't talk about Islam, it talked through it. It gave visual and musical expression to the spiritual realities of the religion and to the social justice imperative in the religion. And that's different from talking about your identity, because then you're just competing with people that have different identities. We punched above our weight, not because we aggressively argued about our identity, but because we contributed to the conversation politically, culturally, sociologically, in ways that other people didn't contribute. We have the most profound system for cultivating authentic spirituality and meaningful social justice, if we would use it. But to do it takes the work of culture, not just the work of knowledge transmission. And that's a man with a PhD saying that. Why am I working with Muslim recording artists? Why am I working with a team of visual artists? Because there are 30, 35 people in this room. How many people would have been down here if our brother Kevin Gates was showing up? The message has to be taken out to the public at large. The work is work of culture. Because the people that are there for Islamic religious knowledge, those aren't the people that you need to reach. You need to reach the people that are in darkness with a word of truth that will introduce a drop of moisture into a desiccating, dying heart and revive them. The same way that the rap music of the 80s and 90s hit my heart and brought me to Islam. Listening to Poor Righteous Teachers. And by the way, we have a collaboration with Wise Intelligent from Poor Righteous Teachers. Yeah, it's wild. I mean, he went in. But in that age, people like Poor Righteous Teachers, Brand Nubians, and others who were associated with what we would call Islamic movements, exactly, would say things at the top of a track. I self law and master, ISLAM. Islam. Arm to the leg, arm, head. Allah. The human being made on Ahsan Taqweem, the best of forms. Arm to the leg, arm, head. That there were these coded messages in the music that, like a trail of breadcrumbs, led you to the door of truths. They weren't rapping about what they believed. They were rapping from within it. Because it wasn't about an identity. It was about the production of a beautiful cultural product that authentically expressed who they are. One of my academic mentors, though I never met him, the great W.E.B. Du Bois, very much like Ibn Khaldun, unacknowledged progenitor of the modern social sciences. If I had to define, I would define Ibn Khaldun as the founder of history and Du Bois as the founder of sociology. Some people would reverse that, but that's the way that I would look at it personally. Du Bois, amazing historian, sociologist, said the problem of the 20th century is a color line. His way of saying what Malcolm said is to say that the problem of the Negro is double consciousness. It's of always measuring your own soul with another man's tape. Well, how could you ever measure us? Right? So this was Du Bois, brilliant scholar, wonderful. He also had a career as a novelist, and it was not good. Very, very bad novelist, because he believed that art had to serve as propaganda for the cause. It had to be tailored to make people believe what you believe. And the thing about that is that that's going to make bad art. If people wanted to hear a sermon, they go to the masjid, but they're not there. So what you have to do instead is make a beautiful cultural product that will reach people's hearts, that will eventually draw them into these conversations. We're preaching to the choir instead of being out in the streets amongst the poor, the meek, and the humble. Now, how do I know that this model of approaching it through cultural relevance will work, aside from the models from the 60s and 70s here? Because this is what made Islam successful in West Africa. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who is the great scholar of Senegal, who, if you know me, follow me on social media, you know that every third word out of my mouth is Serin Touba. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, it's something from his teaching. His community saved my religion when I went to Senegal for the first time in the 90s. They showed me what Islam was supposed to look like. Lived from 1855 to 1927, author of at least 200 distinct books in the Arabic language. Some of them is collections of as many as 200 distinct poems, some of those poems containing as many as 5,000 lines. One of history's most prodigious scholars. Bamba wrote poetry, not prose. He wrote rhymes. And he wrote rhymes because rhymes are musical, rhymes are easily memorized. He did the work of culture. His poems are now recited by children who don't know the meanings of the words, but they've memorized them all by the time they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. The word has already taken root in their heart. They love this word before they even get exposed to it. He provides the harmonic resonance for the Quran itself by praising the messenger of God with the best words that he has. Lots of people had made tafsir. Nobody else provided the backup singing for the Quran itself. Because, and this is an inner reality of the truth of Bamba's poetry, is that the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ traveled together for everyone who knew him. Those of us that try to access the Quran without the experience of feeling an elation and love for the messenger of God ﷺ have never read the Quran. With God as my witness, if you have not read the Quran while in rapturous love for the messenger of God ﷺ, you have not read it. What do you think is meant by in the end of days it'll be in the throats but won't reach the heart? So Bamba wrote this poetic corpus that, pardon the elusive ALLUSIVE Christology here, but that resurrected the messenger of God ﷺ. For anybody that was listening to the poetry, it was as though the Prophet ﷺ was there. Because his excellence, his beauty of character is so vividly chanted. That is cultural work. And it's still doing that work. That's what transforms Senegal into this place where these inner spiritual realities permeate the culture. You've spent, almost as much time there as I have. That's cultural work. Now let's take it down to the final level, and I'll start to conclude with this. Bamba wrote only in Arabic because he was praising the messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He did want his people to sing and recite his poems, but his principal audience was to please the messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, actually, in the prologue to my favorite poem, he said, first he begins with Salat al-Fatih. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. He said, and make this poem a way to Iman, Islam, Ihsan, and eternal happiness. And may it gladden the messenger of God wherever one might read it, recite it, or even look at it. He said, make it amongst the songs sung by the wide-eyed houris and innocent male youths in the paradise promised to the pious. He said, and make it a song that is beloved by you and by him, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. Then when the poem of 165 lines, the numerological value of which is La ilaha illallah, you can ask me about numerology later. He concludes with an epilogue wherein he says, by the face of God Most High, bring joy to the messenger of God with these rhymes in every age and every hour for all eternity. This was the intentionality of Sheikh Ahmed Bamba. So he wrote in Arabic. But when his disciples, like the great Senegalese scholar Sheikh Musa Ka, or his daughters Muslimatu or Maimunatu Mbake, wrote their poetry, they wrote in Wolof to bring it into the language of the people. The 14th chapter, 4th verse of the Quran al-Kareem, God says, never did we send a messenger except in the language of the people. Never did we send a messenger except in the language of the people. Will we make this impact on the culture by having a bunch of people learn Arabic? That's not going to happen. We will make this impact on the culture by delivering it in the language of the people. So when Musa Ka wrote his poetry, praising the messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, praising Sheikh Ahmed Bamba, his teacher, telling the story of this spiritual struggle against imperialism, because Bamba was sent into 7 years, 9 months exile by the French colonial state. He lived the last 27 years of his life under house arrest and changed the world from house arrest with his poems. So when Musa Ka wanted to praise the messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Wolof language, when he wanted to tell the story of this miracle in the Wolof language, some people criticized him. They said, and this is a quote from one of the prologues to Musa Ka's poem. He says, some will say that I shouldn't write this kind of poem in the Wolof language. Some will say that I should use the language of the Holy Quran. I say that whether I use the language of the Holy Quran, the Wolof language, or any other language is the same. Any language that you use to praise the messenger of God will find therein its innermost value. Do we know what English is capable of until we try to use it to communicate the highest of our spiritual aspirations, the deepest of our social struggles against the darkness to find the light? Have we done this work? Or have we tried to copy other people's culture? And lost everything while it happened. Lost everything while it happened. I'm going to conclude on this note. As I began with Moses walking the Nile. Black is the ace of spades. Peace be upon him. He asked that his brother Aaron go with him. And that request was granted. You said it, Imam Jihad, not only do we need the expansion of the breast, but the untying of the tongue. Moses is usually understood to not have been particularly well-spoken. Some say he had a particular speech impediment. There's various narrations in the Qisas al-Anbiya. Few of them actually based in authentic hadith. They're mostly speculative or drawing from the Israeliyat, but there's different opinions on what the nature of Moses' inelegance of speech was. But it's also mentioned in the Quran itself. Pharaoh mocks him. He said, you listen to this one, you don't even talk right. And he asked for Aaron to come with him because Aaron's better spoken. Well, why does that matter? Nobody has access to better truth and direct knowledge of God in that time than Moses, except for on some matters in which Khidr got him. It's another story. But Aaron is able to bring the word in the language of the people. He's able to take those high concepts that Moses is literally bringing down from the mountain and render them in the language of the people. Moses was not raised with his people. Moses is eating good at Pharaoh's house while people's struggling.
Right.
So Aaron needed to be there to bring it into the language of the people, to bring it down to the earth so that everybody could understand it, so that people could benefit. By the way, and then this is just one last sidetrack before I really do wrap this up. Part of decentering the Arab cultural imperialism in the way that the Quran is taught is to remind people that our favorite expressions in the Quran were not said in Arabic. They say, beautiful Arabic, beautiful. This ain't no man, this is a noble angel. Good Lord. That's what the women of Egypt, those black sisters in Egypt, said when they saw Joseph. Good God, that ain't no man. And they cut their hands. And people often point to this as this beautiful turn of phrase and expression in the Arabic language. Oh, she spoke, was she speaking Arabic when she said that? Of course not. Was Mary, peace be upon her, speaking Arabic when she said, قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. Would that I were dead and a thing forgotten in oblivion before I felt these pains of labor upon me. Which, by the way, no man could ever say. The most powerful proof of the veracity of the Quran is that verse. No man would ever think to say that. God said those words. Muhammad didn't. No man knows what a woman goes through when the pains of labor hit her. And God knew what was going on for Mary and for every last one of them. So God bless the women, God bless the women, God bless the women. No man has ever entered this world through Mary. God bless the women. And the Raham is connected to the throne of God. One cuts off the Raham, you cut off the Raham. You cut off the womb, you cut off the mercy. So let's just go back to Moses. Peace be upon him. Those expressions, those beautiful turns of phrase that you hear they were uttered in ancient Egyptian. They were uttered in Aramaic. They were uttered in African or Afro-Asiatic languages. God translated them into Arabic. Why? Because he says in Surah Yusuf, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلِّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. I sent it as an Arabic Quran so that y'all would understand it. So that y'all would, y'all understand it, taqilun. The Quran is a universal book wherein God is taking multiple languages, most of them African, and translating them into Arabic to bring this last word. It's always brought in the language of the people because that's how the people are going to need to understand it. It needs to be in relevant cultural terms. It has to hit the mark with the word. So let's now finish with Moses and Aaron along the Nile. Imam Fore Drame, the great scholar who I mentioned before, contemporary scholar of Jahanke, Gambian and Senegalese origin, pointed out once that not only were the messengers always sent in the language of the people, but they were always sent with the antidote to whatever was being used to poison the people in the time. Mm. The only art amongst the Arabs of that time of any significance was their poetry. And their poetry was where they sang songs to one another about the honor of men, the feebleness of women, and then went out to cut each other to ribbons and bury their daughters. So God sent a word that swallowed the lies that were in their poems. The same way that Moses cast a staff, we talked about asbab, means, veils, measures. The stick doesn't do anything, God does it. But when Moses throws the stick, God transforms it, and it swallows the lies of the sorcerers. The poison that is being used to destroy the people in this time is our culture, Black people. our music, our fashion, our cultural style, our linguistic register, the way that we talk, the way that we move, the way that we sing, the way that we dance, that is now being used to deliver sex, money, and murder.
Mm-hmm.
We have to throw back with better magic. We have to throw back with better culture, better music, better art, better fashion. We have to reappropriate our cultural style and rock it with the swag that Muhammad Ali did.
Mm-hmm.
Stride confidently with it the way that Malcolm did. That's what will make us relevant again. Being thoroughly and unapologetically us. From the banks of the Nile to the corner of Crenshaw and Slauson. That's what I came to say.